I remember signing those hospital consent forms more clearly than the surgery itself. It was March 2021, 2 weeks before they would open my chest, and I sat across from a cardiologist who explained the risks in that practice. Study tone doctors use when they've given the same speech 1,000 times. Stroke. Infection. Death. I initiated each line with a pen that barely worked, the ink skipping across the hospital's cheap photocopied paper. My son Daniel sat in the corner of that pre-op room, scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing up when the nurse mentioned something about billing or insurance. Only when she asked about next of kin did he actually pay attention. I wrote his name in careful block letters. Medical power of attorney. I wrote his name again, this time in the flowing cursive my mother taught me when I was 7 years old, the kind of signature that looks official on legal documents. Daniel squeezed my shoulder and said, "I've got you, Mom." What he didn't say was that he'd also have my business. My bank accounts. My vendors. My clients. Everything I'd spent 23 years building, from one leased truck and a storage unit barely big enough to hold a desk. What he didn't know was that late the night before, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and the lamp throwing shadows across the wall, I had filed articles of organization for a second company. I had opened a separate bank account at a branch 30 minutes away. I had created a folder on my laptop labeled Bridge, No Backup. Bridge. Because I wasn't planning to rebuild. I was planning to cross over. Because by then, I trusted my cardiologist more than I trusted my son's judgment. I trusted the anesthesiologist who would put me under. I trusted the nurses who would monitor my vitals. I even trusted the hospital billing department to charge me correctly. But I didn't trust Daniel anymore. And I was right not to. The story of how my son tried to steal my business while I was on a surgical table, and how I'd already quietly moved everything that mattered, starts earlier than that hospital morning. It starts in the small cracks of a partnership I built and he inherited. It starts in the invoices I signed and the meetings he moved. It starts with changed passwords and redirected phone calls, and the slow, methodical erasure of my name from documents I created. It starts in a logistics company I built from nothing, one truck, one client, one route at a time, and a son who thought ownership meant having the right signatures on the right papers. He didn't understand that real ownership is in the systems. The relationships. The knowledge of which client pays on time and which one needs 3 reminders. The ability to look at a route map and know immediately which driver can handle which load. That kind of ownership doesn't transfer with a signature. It transfers with trust. And trust, once broken, doesn't repair. Let me tell you what really happened. Let me show you how quiet revenge looks when it's built on spreadsheets, legal clauses, and the patience of a woman who learned long ago that silence is a strategy and that sometimes the best way to win is to let the other person think they've already won. Let me show you how betrayal becomes clarity. How desperation becomes preparation. How a hospital room becomes the place where everything changes, not because of what happens to your body, but because of what happens to your business while you're unconscious and someone else is holding the keys. This is the story of how I lost my company and found it again. How I gave my son power and took it back. How I lay on an operating table trusting doctors with my heart while my son was across town forging my signature. And how, by the time I woke up, I'd already built the exit he didn't know existed. In late February of 2021, Houston still carried that damp chill that settles over the city when winter refuses to fully release its grip. The sun went down too early, before 6 o'clock, and the traffic on Interstate 10 never seemed to stop, not even at midnight when the city should have been sleeping. Ellen Park sat at her kitchen table most evenings, laptop open, a stack of invoices on one side, a bowl of reheated soup on the other, reading glasses perched on her nose. She was 56 years old, 2 weeks from heart bypass surgery, and increasingly certain that the business she had built from nothing was slipping through her fingers while her son smiled and told her not to worry. The house was small, brick, built sometime in the 1970s when this neighborhood was considered suburban and new. Now it was just old houses, old trees, old neighbors who'd lived here for 30 years and knew everyone's business. Ellen had lived here for 18 years, ever since her husband died and left her with a mortgage, a 12-year-old son, and a delivery job that barely covered groceries and the electric bill. That delivery job had turned into a business. That business had turned into Parkway Freight Solutions. One truck became three. Three became a fleet. A storage unit became a warehouse. A line of credit became revenue in the seven figures. Annual contracts with manufacturers and distributors. A reputation for reliability. A company people trusted with their shipments because Ellen Park answered her phone at 2 a.m. when something went wrong and she fixed it before sunrise. She had done it alone. Every route. Every contract. Every midnight call when a driver broke down on Interstate 10 between Houston and San Antonio, when a shipment arrived damaged and a client was screaming into the phone, when the truck wouldn't start and a deadline was 3 hours away. Daniel had come into the business 3 years earlier, in 2018, after his divorce left him with debt, shared custody of 2 kids, and a resume that showed 7 years of mid-level sales positions at companies no one had heard of. Ellen had made him a partner. Not equal ownership, she kept 60%, gave him 40%, but significant. Enough to matter. Enough to feel like he was building something too. For a while, it worked beautifully. Daniel was the charmer. He walked into client meetings with a smile and a handshake and remembered everyone's kids' names, their golf handicaps, the vacation they'd just taken to Destin or South Padre Island. He made people feel seen, appreciated, important. Ellen was the spreadsheet. She remembered payment terms, renewal dates, weight limits, fuel costs, driver schedules, maintenance intervals. She knew which client paid net 30 and which one tried to stretch it to net 60. She knew which driver called in sick every third Friday and which one would drive through a thunderstorm without complaint. Together, they had balanced each other. Daniel brought in new clients. Ellen made sure those clients got serviced correctly and billed accurately. Daniel talked about growth and expansion. Ellen made sure they had the cash flow to support it. It was a balance. Until it wasn't. The first sign came in January of 2021, barely 2 months before Ellen's surgery date. Daniel started referring to my operations team instead of ours, Ellen noticed, but didn't comment. It seemed small. Semantic. The kind of thing that could be explained as a slip of the tongue or a casual shorthand. But it kept happening. In meetings. In emails. On phone calls with vendors. "Let me check with my team," Daniel would say. Not our team, not Ellen's team, my team. Ellen made a note in the small spiral notebook she kept in her desk drawer. January 8th. Possessive language shift. The second sign came when Daniel moved their weekly planning meetings from 9 a.m, when Ellen was always there, fresh, caffeinated, ready to review manifests and discuss route changes, to 4 p.m, when he knew she had standing medical appointments. Cardiology follow-ups. Blood work. Pre-op consultations. When Ellen mentioned it, Daniel shrugged and said, "Easier for the drivers. Most of them are on the road in the mornings." It was reasonable. It even made sense. Except that for 20 years, 9 a.m. had worked just fine. The drivers had always made it work. They'd adjusted their schedules. They'd called in from the road if they couldn't attend in person. Now, suddenly, 4 in the afternoon was better. Which meant Ellen missed half the meetings because she was at the doctor's office getting her blood pressure checked or her cholesterol levels reviewed or listening to a cardiologist explain why her arteries were narrowing and what would happen if she didn't get surgery soon. Ellen made another note. January 15th. Meeting times changed. No consultation. The third sign came when vendors Ellen had worked with for over a decade started calling Daniel's cell phone first. Not as a backup when Ellen was unavailable. As the primary contact. The first call. Rick, who ran the truck maintenance and repair shop Ellen had used since 2007, called her one afternoon in late January and said, "Hey, just wanted to confirm, I should be routing invoices through Daniel now, right?" Ellen kept her voice level. "Why would you do that?" "He told me last week. Said it would streamline communication. Make things easier for everyone." "Did he?" Ellen said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah. So I just wanted to check with you before I changed my contact list." Don't change it, Ellen said. Send invoices to both of us. Sure thing, Rick said. But Ellen could hear the hesitation in his voice. The discomfort. Rick didn't want to be caught in the middle of whatever was happening. Ellen hung up and made another note. January 22nd. Vendor redirect. No authorization. By mid-February, Ellen was being left off email chains she used to initiate. She'd check her inbox in the morning and see threads about rate adjustments, new client contracts, driver schedules, conversations she should have been part of, except her name wasn't in the CC line anymore. She pulled up one thread from February 9th. A discussion about a significant rate increase for a major client, Laura Chen's manufacturing plant, which represented nearly 30% of their annual revenue. The email chain had 16 messages. Daniel was on every one. The operations manager was on every one. Marjorie, their accountant, was one of several. Ellen's name appeared nowhere. She opened her sent folder to see if maybe she deleted something by accident. Nothing. She checked her spam folder. Nothing. She called the operations manager, a woman named Patricia who'd been with the company for 8 years. Patricia, did you send me the email thread about Laura Chen's rate adjustment? There was a pause. I thought Daniel was handling that. He is, Ellen said carefully. But I should still be copied. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll add you to the next one. But the next one didn't come. Or if it did, it went to Daniel's inbox, not Ellen's. Ellen added it to her notebook. February 9th. Excluded from client communications. Major account. Then came the meeting with Marjorie. Marjorie Lewis had been Ellen's CPA for 15 years. She was 61, divorced, meticulous, and deeply uncomfortable with ambiguity. She kept immaculate records. She filed taxes early. She spotted discrepancies before they became problems. On February 18th, Marjorie called Ellen's cell phone in the middle of the afternoon. Do you have a few minutes? Marjorie asked. Of course. Daniel came by my office this morning. He asked to meet. Just him and me. Ellen's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice neutral. What about? He wants to discuss restructuring ownership. He said he's concerned about succession planning. About what happens if something happens to you. If something happens to me, Ellen repeated. Those were his words, Marjorie said carefully. He asked me to draft documents showing a transfer of control. Increasing his ownership percentage. Decreasing yours. Ellen closed her eyes. What did you tell him? I told him I'd need written authorization from you before I drafted anything. He said you'd already agreed to it verbally. I haven't. I know, Marjorie said quietly. That's why I'm calling. Ellen exhaled slowly. Thank you. There's something else, Marjorie said. He asked me about your signature. Whether I could replicate it for administrative purposes. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Ellen gripped the edge of the kitchen table. What did you say? Ellen asked. I said no. Good. There was a long pause. Then Marjorie said, Ellen, I've worked with you for 15 years. If something's wrong, you need to tell me. Nothing's wrong yet, Ellen said. But I need you to do something for me. What? Keep copies of everything. Every document Daniel brings to you. Every request he makes. Every conversation. Date and timestamp everything. Okay, Marjorie said. Can I ask why? Because I might need proof, Ellen said. Later. She hung up and sat at the table for a long time, staring at the stack of invoices, the cold bowl of soup, the laptop screen showing her business email inbox with its gaps and absences. Daniel wasn't just taking over operations. He was preparing to erase her. And he thought she didn't notice. That night, Ellen opened her laptop and navigated to the Texas Secretary of State Business Filings portal. The site was familiar. She'd used it 23 years ago when she filed the original documents for Parkway Freight Solutions. Back then, her hands had shaken. She'd been 33 years old, recently widowed, terrified that the $50 filing fee was money she couldn't afford to lose. She'd filled out the form sitting at this same kitchen table, with her 12-year-old son asleep down the hall, and she'd cried afterward because she didn't know if she was being brave or stupid. This time, her hands were steady. She filled out the form for a new limited liability company. Name, Parkway Bridge Logistics, LLC. Registered agent, Ellen Marie Park. Principal address, her home address, not the warehouse. She entered her personal email address, not the business one Daniel could access. She paid the filing fee with a credit card Daniel didn't know about, one she'd opened years ago and kept for emergencies. It took 47 minutes to complete the entire process. When the confirmation email arrived, she saved it in a new folder on her desktop labeled Bridge, Legal. Then she opened a text document and typed a single line, February 23rd. Parkway Bridge Logistics LLC formed. Tax ID pending. She closed the laptop, washed the soup bowl, and went to bed. She didn't think of it as betrayal. She thought of it as preparation. As a contingency. As the thing you do when you see a storm coming and you can't stop it, but you can make sure you have shelter. 3 days later, on February 26th, Ellen drove to a bank branch she'd never used before. It was 30 minutes from her house, in a shopping center she had no reason to visit, next to a grocery store she'd never shopped at. The bank was clean, bright, and modern. Soft music played over hidden speakers. The teller directed her to a banker's desk near the back. The banker was a woman in her early 50s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and a nameplate that said Sandra Reyes. "How can I help you today?" Sandra asked. "I need to open a business checking account," Ellen said. "Wonderful. Do you have your business documentation?" Ellen handed over a printed copy of the Articles of Organization for Parkway Bridge Logistics, LLC. Sandra reviewed it, nodded, and began typing into her computer. "This is a new business?" Sandra asked. "A side project," Ellen said. "Separate from my main operations." "What kind of business?" "Logistics. Freight services." "Same industry?" "Yes." Sandra nodded and continued typing. "We'll need a tax ID number." "I applied for it. It should be issued within the next week." "That's fine. We can set up the account now and add the tax ID later." Sandra slid a signature card across the desk. "Just need your signature here." Ellen signed. Sandra printed a temporary debit card and handed it over along with a small welcome folder. "We'll have the permanent card mailed to you within 7 to 10 business days. Is there anything else you need?" "A line of credit," Ellen said. "Eventually. But not yet." "No problem. When you're ready, just give me a call." Ellen thanked her, left the bank, and drove to a coffee shop 3 miles away. She sat in her car in the parking lot and updated a spreadsheet on her phone, adding the new account number, the bank's routing number, and the date. The second company now had a tax ID number, pending, and a bank account. It had a legal existence. It had financial infrastructure. Daniel didn't know. He didn't need to know. Not yet. Ellen started the car and drove home, listening to the radio, watching the Houston traffic crawl along the feeder road. It was Friday afternoon. The weekend was coming. And in 2.5 weeks, she would be in a hospital, unconscious, trusting strangers with her life. She needed to move faster. That weekend, Ellen worked at her kitchen table from dawn until midnight both days. She registered trademarks for the Parkway Freight logo, the company name, and the route optimization software system she developed over years of trial and error. She filed them under her personal name, not the company's. She transferred the software licenses, route planning, dispatch management, GPS tracking from the company account to a personal holding account. The licenses were paid annually. The next renewal wasn't until June. By the time Daniel noticed, it would be too late. She downloaded copies of every training manual she'd written, every process document, every client profile. She moved them to her personal cloud storage, password protected, with 2-factor authentication. She reviewed the warehouse lease. It was in her name only. The lease agreement, signed 3 years ago, required her written signature for any transfer, sublease, or assignment. Daniel couldn't move the business without her approval. She reviewed the line of credit documents. Same thing. The credit was personally guaranteed by Ellen Marie Park. The bank couldn't transfer it to Daniel without her consent. She reviewed the partnership agreement she'd drafted when Daniel joined the business. It required both partners' signatures for any change in ownership structure, any sale of assets, any major financial decisions over $50,000. Daniel had never read it carefully. Ellen had. She'd written it specifically to protect herself. Now she made copies of everything, digital and physical. She saved them in multiple locations: her laptop, her personal cloud, a USB drive she kept in the manila folder in her desk drawer. By Sunday night, Ellen had created a parallel infrastructure, a second company that could operate independently, a legal framework that gave her control over the assets that actually mattered, not the trucks or the warehouse, but the systems, the relationships, the knowledge. Daniel could have the name. He could have the building. He could have the debt. Ellen would keep everything else. On Monday, March 1st, Ellen called a law office recommended by a woman she'd met in a cardiac rehab support group 3 months earlier. The woman, whose name was Janet, had lost her business in a divorce. Her husband had waited until she was traveling for work, then filed papers claiming sole ownership of a company they'd built together. "It took me 2 years to fight it," Janet had said over coffee one afternoon. 2 years and $100,000 in legal fees. "If I'd prepared earlier, if I'd known what was coming, I could have protected myself." She'd given Ellen a business card. "If you ever need someone who understands this kind of thing, call him. Richard Alvarez. He specializes in business disputes and fraud." Ellen had tucked the card into her wallet and forgotten about it until now. She called the number. A receptionist answered. "Alvarez Law Group." "I need to schedule a consultation," Ellen said. "With Richard Alvarez." "What's the nature of the case?" Ellen paused. "Business partnership dispute. Potential fraud. He has an opening Thursday at 2. I'll take it." Ellen hung up and made a note in her calendar. March 4th. Attorney consultation. 2 p.m. That same day, she called Laura Chen. Laura was the plant manager at Southwest Manufacturing Solutions, a mid-sized company that produced automotive parts for dealerships across Texas. Laura was 54, practical, perpetually busy, and allergic to inefficiency. She'd been Ellen's client for 9 years. They talked every month about routes, schedules, delivery windows. Laura trusted Ellen because Ellen never made promises she couldn't keep. "Laura, do you have a minute?" Ellen asked. "For you?" "Always." "What's up?" "I wanted to run something by you. A pilot project." "I'm listening." "I'm testing a new routing optimization system," Ellen said. It wasn't entirely a lie. She was planning to use the system under a new company structure. "I'd like to run your routes through it. Same service, same drivers, but under my direct oversight. Separate from the main company operations." "Why separate?" "Because I want to isolate variables. Make sure the system works before rolling it out company-wide. And you want to use our routes as the test case. If you're comfortable with that." Laura was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Will Daniel be involved?" Ellen chose her words carefully. "This would be under my personal supervision. I'd be the primary contact." "Good," Laura said immediately. "No offense to your son, but I work with you, not him. If you're running it, I'm in. I'll send you a draft agreement this week." "Sounds good." Ellen hung up and exhaled. Laura had just confirmed what Ellen suspected. Clients followed the service, not the name on the door. If Ellen moved, Laura would move with her. She called 2 other long-term clients that week and had similar conversations. Both agreed to pilot programs under Ellen's direct oversight. Both expressed, in polite but clear terms, that they preferred working with Ellen. By Thursday, March 4th, when Ellen walked into Richard Alvarez's office for her consultation, she had. A second company was formed and registered. A bank account opened and active. Trademarks filed under her personal name. Software licenses transferred to personal control. 3 major clients ready to sign agreements under the new entity. Copies of every critical document stored in multiple secure locations. Richard Alvarez's office was small, neat, and professional. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with legal texts and case binders. A window overlooked a parking lot. Alvarez himself was in his mid-40s, trim, with graying hair and a calm, methodical way of speaking. "Tell me what's happening," he said. Ellen explained everything. The shifted meetings. The redirected communications. The conversation with Marjorie about ownership restructuring. The request to replicate her signature. Alvarez took notes on a legal pad. When Ellen finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Have you signed anything recently?" he asked. "No." "Have you given him power of attorney?" "Only medical. For the surgery." "That's limited to medical decisions," Alvarez said. "It doesn't give him access to business accounts or legal documents." "I know." Alvarez tapped his pen on the legal pad. "If he tries to change ownership or access accounts without your consent, that's fraud. You'd have grounds for criminal charges." "I don't want to press charges," Ellen said. "He's my son." "I understand. But you need to know your options." "What I want," Ellen said carefully, "is to separate from him. Legally. Cleanly. I want to protect the assets I built while giving him the option to keep the original company if he wants it." Alvarez nodded. "You've already formed a second entity." "Yes." "Smart. That gives you leverage. If he moves against you, you have a place to land." "Exactly. What do you want me to do?" "Draft a separation agreement. One that formalizes the split. He gets full ownership of the original company. I get the intellectual property, the client relationships, and the right to operate independently. And if he doesn't agree, then we file charges," Ellen said. "Fraud. Forgery. Whatever applies." Alvarez made more notes. "I'll draft something. Give me a week." "I have surgery in 2 weeks," Ellen said. "I need this done before then." Alvarez looked up. "What kind of surgery?" "Heart bypass." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll have a draft for you in 3 days." "Thank you." Ellen left the office and drove home. The sky was gray. Rain was coming. She could feel the pressure change in her chest, the ache that had become familiar over the past 6 months. She had 2 weeks until surgery. 2 weeks to build the rest of the bridge. 2 weeks to make sure that when she woke up, if she woke up, Daniel couldn't take what she'd built. 2 weeks. It would have to be enough. The logistics office sat in an industrial park off the Southwest Freeway, tucked between a tile distributor and a commercial HVAC repair shop. The building was plain, functional, white metal siding, 2 bay doors for truck access, a small front entrance with a glass door and a buzzer that didn't always work. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over a dispatch area that smelled like coffee, diesel, and old carpet. The front room held 4 desks arranged in a square: dispatch, operations, accounting, and customer service. The back room was larger, warehouse space with metal shelving, stacks of pallets, boxes of supplies. A small office in the corner had a door that closed and a window that looked out over the warehouse floor. That office had been Ellen's for 23 years. Now it felt less like hers every day. By early March of 2021, Ellen wasn't sitting in that office as often. Not because she'd stopped coming in, she still arrived most mornings by 7:30, still checked manifests and reviewed invoices, but because the office operated around her now instead of with her. Daniel was there earlier. He stayed later. He'd moved his desk into the back office, the one with the door, and Ellen had moved to a desk in the front room. No one had discussed it. It had just happened, gradually, over a period of weeks. "Makes more sense," Daniel had said when Ellen mentioned it. "I'm handling operations now. Operations should be in the back where I can see the warehouse." It was logical. Reasonable. Ellen didn't argue. But she noticed. The morning dispatch meetings were still held at 9 o'clock, though now they happened in the warehouse instead of the office. Drivers gathered near the bay doors, holding coffee cups and clipboards, while Daniel stood at a whiteboard with a dry erase marker, sketching routes and talking about efficiency. Ellen attended those meetings, standing at the back of the group, listening. She noticed how Daniel now referred to routes as mine instead of ours. She noticed how he'd reassigned 2 longtime drivers, Carlos and Dennis, who'd been with the company for over 10 years, to different schedules without consulting her. She noticed how he'd updated the company voicemail greeting to say, "You've reached Parkway Freight Solutions. I'm Daniel Park, Operations Manager. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." Operations Manager. Not a partner. Not co-owner. When Ellen asked him about it, Daniel shrugged. "It's clearer for clients. They want to know who's running things day to day." "I run things day to day," Ellen said. Daniel smiled. A patient, slightly condescending smile. "You used to, Mom." But with your health issues, I figured it made sense for me to take on more. Health issues. As if 23 years of building a company could be reduced to a phrase like that. Ellen didn't argue. She made a note in her spiral notebook, which she now carried everywhere. March 4th. Voicemail updated without discussion. The title changed to Operations Manager. The next change came with the email system. On March 5th, Ellen logged into the company email account to find several threads missing from her inbox. Not deleted, she checked the trash folder. Just absent, as if she'd never been included in the first place. One of the missing threads involved a rate negotiation with a retail distribution client. Ellen had initiated that negotiation 3 weeks earlier. She'd sent the first email. She'd set the terms. But now, when she searched her inbox for the thread, it was gone. She checked her sent folder. The original email was there, dated February 12th. But there were no replies. No follow-up messages. She called Patricia, the operations manager who handled scheduling and client communications. Patricia, did you get the follow-up emails on the retail distribution rate negotiation? There was a pause. Yes. Daniel's been handling that. Where are the emails? In the shared folder, I think. Ellen checked the shared folder. Nothing. Did Daniel move them somewhere? Ellen asked. I don't know. Maybe ask him. Ellen hung up and walked to the back office. Daniel was at the desk, typing on his laptop. I'm missing some emails, Ellen said. Daniel looked up. Which ones? The retail distribution rate negotiation. I started that 3 weeks ago. Now I can't find any of the follow-up messages. Oh, Daniel said. I moved those to a separate thread. Didn't want to clog up your inbox. I need to see them. Sure. I'll forward them. He didn't forward them. That afternoon, a vendor called. Rick, from the truck maintenance and repair shop. Ellen had worked with Rick for 12 years. They had a routine. Rick called her cell directly when something needed quick approval. She made decisions on the spot. No delays, no back and forth. Except this time, Rick said, Hey Ellen, just wanted to confirm, Daniel told me last week that I should route all invoices through him from now on. Is that still the case? Ellen kept her voice neutral. When did he say that? Last Tuesday. He came by the shop. Said it would streamline things. Did he? Ellen said. It wasn't a question. Yeah. So I just wanted to check before I update my contact list. Send invoices to both of us, Ellen said. You got it. But Ellen could hear the hesitation in Rick's voice. The discomfort of being caught in the middle. She added it to her notebook. March 5th. Vendor redirect without authorization. Rick's auto repair. By the end of that week, the pattern was unmistakable. Daniel was systematically rerouting communication, removing Ellen from decision points, centralizing control in his own hands. It was slow, methodical, careful. If Ellen hadn't been paying attention, if she'd been distracted by her health, by the upcoming surgery, by the exhaustion that came with preparing to have your chest opened, she might have missed it entirely. But Ellen had spent her entire adult life paying attention to patterns, to cash flow discrepancies, to invoices that didn't match delivery confirmations, to the small, quiet gaps between what people said and what they actually did. She opened her laptop and checked the company bank account. She still had access. For now, the balance looked normal. No major withdrawals. No unusual transfers. Revenue was steady. Expenses were predictable. But Ellen knew that bank balances and power structures were two different things. You could change a company's dynamics without touching a single dollar. You just had to control access to information, to communicate, to relationships. The weekly planning meeting was scheduled for Monday, March 8th at 4 in the afternoon. Ellen arrived at 3:50, 10 minutes early. The conference room, really just a corner of the warehouse office with a folding table and 6 mismatched chairs, was empty. She sat down, opened her laptop, and waited. Daniel arrived at 4:16. He carried a coffee cup from the gas station down the street and his phone. He looked surprised to see her. Oh, he said. You're here. It's our planning meeting, Ellen said. Right. I just didn't think you'd make it. Don't you have a cardio appointment today? I rescheduled. You didn't need to do that. I've got everything covered. I'd still like to be included. Of course, Daniel said. But his tone suggested otherwise. He sat down, set his coffee on the table, and opened his laptop. He pulled up a spreadsheet, one Ellen hadn't seen before, and turned the screen so she could see it. Okay, so here's where we are, Daniel said. Routes are solid. We've got 2 new clients onboarding this week. A warehouse space client for a medical supply distributor and a retail apparel company doing short-haul, high-frequency deliveries. Both are good margins. Ellen studied the screen. When did these contracts come in? Last week. I didn't see them. I handled them, Daniel said. Didn't want to bother you with the details. I need to see the details. Daniel scrolled to another tab and turned the laptop toward her. The contracts were there, signed and dated. Ellen's name appeared nowhere on them. Only Daniel's signature, neat and confident on the approval line. These are company contracts, Ellen said carefully. We usually both sign for new clients. You were busy, Daniel said. I didn't want to slow things down. Ellen made a mental note. March 8th. Major contracts signed without co-signature. New policy. She decided not to push further. Not yet. Pushing would create friction. Friction would alert Daniel that she was tracking his moves. Instead, she asked, how's cash flow looking? Tight, but manageable, Daniel said. We've got some aging receivables, but nothing critical. Which accounts? I'll send you a breakdown. He didn't send it. That night, Ellen sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open and her notebook beside her. She reviewed the day's notes. March 8th. Planning meeting. 2 new clients signed without my approval. Contracts executed with Daniel's signature only. Aging receivables mentioned, but no details provided. She opened her email and composed a message to Richard Alvarez, her attorney. I need to move faster. More evidence of systematic exclusion. Can you have the separation agreement ready by the end of the week? Surgery is March 19th. Need this finalized before then. She hit send and closed the laptop. Then she opened the manila folder labeled Bridge, Legal, and reviewed her checklist. Company formed, done. Bank account opened, done. Trademarks filed, done. Software licenses transferred, done. Client agreements drafted, in progress. Legal separation agreement, pending. Warehouse lease review, done. Requires my signature for transfer. Line of credit review, done. Personally guaranteed by me. Ellen had spent 2 weeks building a parallel structure. Now she needed to activate it. The next morning, Tuesday, March 9th, Ellen arrived at the office at 6:30, before anyone else. She unlocked the side door with her key, turned off the alarm, she still had the code, and walked through the quiet warehouse to the back office. The filing cabinets were locked. Ellen had a key. She opened the cabinet labeled Contracts, Current, and pulled out 3 folders at random. The first folder, a 6-month agreement with a furniture retailer. Signed by Daniel only. Dated February 28th. The second folder, a 1-year contract with an industrial supply distributor. Signed by Daniel only. Dated March 2nd. The third folder, a renewal with one of their oldest clients, a printing company Ellen had worked with since 2009. Signed by Daniel only. Dated March 5th. Ellen photographed each signature page with her phone, then returned the folders to their original positions. She locked the cabinet, reset the alarm, and left the building before anyone arrived. At 7:15, she was sitting in her car in a grocery store parking lot 3 miles away, transferring the photos to her cloud storage and adding them to the folder labeled Evidence, Unauthorized Signatures. At 8:30, her phone rang. Marjorie. Ellen, do you have a minute? Of course. Daniel called me this morning. He wants to meet this afternoon. Just him and me. He said it's about financial restructuring. Ellen's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice level. What time? 4 o'clock. Go to the meeting, Ellen said. Take notes. Record it if you can. Record it? Your phone has a voice recorder, right? Yes. Use it. Texas is a one-party consent state. You don't need his permission. There was a long pause. Then Marjorie said quietly, Ellen, what's happening? I don't know yet, Ellen said. But I need to document everything. Will you do that for me? Yes. Thank you. At 4:47 that afternoon, Ellen was sitting in her car outside a coffee shop when her phone rang. Marjorie. I just left the meeting, Marjorie said. Her voice was tight, controlled. What did he say? Marjorie exhaled. He wants me to draft documents transferring majority ownership to him. He said you're not healthy enough to manage day-to-day operations anymore, and that for the good of the company, control needs to shift to him. Ellen's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What did you tell him? I said I needed written authorization from you before I could draft anything. He said you'd already agreed verbally. I haven't. I know. I told him I needed it in writing anyway. Good. What else? Marjorie hesitated. He asked me if I could replicate your signature. He said it was for administrative purposes. To streamline approvals while you're recovering from surgery. The coffee shop parking lot seemed to blur. Ellen closed her eyes and focused on breathing. What did you say? Ellen asked. I said no. I told him that would be a fraud. What did he say to that? He laughed. He said I was overthinking it. That it wasn't fraud if you'd already approved the changes verbally. But I haven't. I know that, Marjorie said. Ellen, I've worked with you for 15 years. I know when something's off. Thank you for calling me. There's one more thing, Marjorie said. I recorded the conversation. I have it saved on my phone. Ellen felt something loosen in her chest. Relief. Gratitude. Send it to me. Email. My personal account, not the business 1-inch. I will. And Marjorie. Yes. Keep a copy for yourself. Somewhere he can't access. I will. Ellen hung up and sat in the coffee shop parking lot until the sun started to set. Then she drove home, uploaded Marjorie's recording to her cloud storage, and added it to the evidence folder. That night, she opened her laptop and wrote an email to Richard Alvarez. Attached, recording of CPA meeting with my business partner. He requested documents transferring ownership and asked her to forge my signature. Need separation agreement finalized immediately. Will sign anything you send me. She attached the audio file and hit send. Richard Alvarez called her the next morning at 7:30. I listened to the recording, he said. This is clear evidence of intent to commit fraud. If he actually forges your signature and files documents, you have grounds for criminal charges. I don't want to wait until he commits fraud, Ellen said. I want to separate now. I'm finishing the agreement today. I'll email it to you by tonight. Thank you. Ellen, Alvarez said. One more thing. You need to change your passwords. All of them. Bank accounts, email, everything. And enable two-factor authentication. I already did that. Good. Also, consider revoking his medical power of attorney. Ellen paused. I can't do that before surgery. I need someone in case something goes wrong. Do you have anyone else? My sister. Use her. File the paperwork today. I'll send you the form. Okay. Ellen hung up and immediately called Ruth. I need you to do something for me, Ellen said. What? Be my medical power of attorney. Instead of Daniel. Ruth was silent for a moment. Then she said, What did he do? I'll tell you later. Can you do it? Of course. That afternoon, Ellen drove to the hospital and filed new medical power of attorney paperwork, naming Ruth Delgado as her primary decision-maker. She also updated her emergency contact information, replacing Daniel's cell number with Ruth's. Then she drove to the bank, the one where Parkway Bridge Logistics had its account, and met with Sandra Reyes again. I need to set up alerts, Ellen said. Any transaction over $500, I want a text message notification. Any change to account access, I want an email and a phone call. Not a problem, Sandra said. Anything else? If anyone calls claiming to be me, don't make any changes without verifying with me first, even if they have all my information. Sandra looked at Ellen carefully. Is there a security concern? There might be, Ellen said. I'm being cautious. Understood. I'll put a note on your account. Verification required for all changes. Thank you. Ellen left the bank and drove to the warehouse. It was late afternoon. Most of the drivers were out on routes. Patricia was at her desk in the front room, typing something into the dispatch system. Ellen walked past her to the back office. Daniel was on the phone. He saw Ellen and held up one finger. Hold on. Ellen waited. Daniel finished the call and hung up. What's up, Mom? I need to talk to you about something. Sure. Sit down. Ellen sat. She kept her face neutral, her voice calm. I've been reviewing our partnership agreement. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Okay. It says that major decisions, anything over $50,000, any change in ownership structure, any sale of assets, requires both of our signatures. Right. I've noticed some contracts being signed without my approval. Daniel shrugged. Those were operational, not major decisions. A one-year contract with a new client is a major decision. It's routine business, Mom. It still requires my signature. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. Are you saying you want to approve every single contract? I'm saying that's what the agreement requires. That's going to slow things down. Then we'll slow things down. Daniel stared at her for a moment. Then he smiled, a tight, controlled smile. Okay, I'll make sure to loop you in. Thank you. Ellen stood and walked out. She didn't believe him. But she'd made her point. That night, Richard Alvarez emailed the separation agreement. It was 18 pages, formatted in dense legal paragraphs, but the core terms were clear. Daniel would acquire full ownership of Parkway Freight Solutions, LLC, including all physical assets, trucks, warehouse lease, office equipment, all existing liabilities, debts, vendor obligations, pending taxes, and the right to operate under the Parkway Freight name. Ellen would retain sole ownership of all intellectual property, route optimization software, training manuals, operational processes, all trademarks filed under her personal name, the right to operate Parkway Bridge Logistics, LLC without restriction, and all client relationships executed under her personal oversight. Both parties would sign mutual releases, agreeing not to sue each other for any claims arising from the business. The agreement would become effective upon both signatures. Ellen read it 3 times. Then she called Alvarez. This is good, she said. When can we execute it? After your surgery. Once you're recovered enough to sit down and sign in person. What if he tries something while I'm in the hospital? Then you have grounds for fraud charges. But Ellen, if you're that worried, maybe you should postpone the surgery. Ellen thought about her cardiologist's face during her last appointment. The way he'd looked at the test results and said, we need to do this soon. Your arteries are severely blocked. If you wait too long, you risk a heart attack. I can't postpone, Ellen said. Then make sure your sister has copies of everything. And make sure your bank accounts are locked down. They are. Good. I'll be available by phone if anything happens. Ellen hung up and sat at her kitchen table, staring at the settlement agreement on her laptop screen. 18 pages of legal protection. A bridge from one life to another. She saved it in the bridge legal folder and closed the laptop. In 1 week, she would be on a surgical table, unconscious, while her son somewhere made his move. She was as ready as she could be. The surgery was scheduled for Friday, March 19, 2021, at St. Luke's Hospital in the Texas Medical Center. Ellen was supposed to arrive at 6 in the morning. No food or water after midnight. Bring identification, insurance cards, a list of medications, and a small bag with comfortable clothes for after. She packed the bag on Thursday night. Loose sweatpants. A soft button-up shirt that wouldn't rub against her incision. Slip-on shoes. Her phone charger. A small notebook and pen. A list of emergency contacts. Ruth had written her own number at the top in thick marker. Call me first. Ellen's phone rang at 8:30 that evening. Daniel. Hey, Mom. I'll pick you up tomorrow morning. 5:30, okay? Ellen had already decided this. Had already played out the conversation in her mind. Actually, Ruth's driving me. There was a pause. Why? She offered. And I'd like her to be there. I'll be there too. I know. But she's driving. Another pause. Okay. Whatever you want. Ellen could hear the irritation beneath the words. The slight edge of someone who'd expected control and found resistance. I'll see you at the hospital, Ellen said. See you there. He hung up without saying goodbye. Ellen set the phone down and exhaled. One small act of defiance. One small way of saying, I'm still here. I'm still making my own decisions. That night, Ellen lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of her house. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the air vents, the distant traffic on the freeway 3 blocks away. She thought about the surgery, the risks the cardiologist had explained. Stroke, infection, bleeding, heart attack during recovery, death. She wasn't afraid of dying. She'd come close to it before in the months after her husband's death, when grief had felt like drowning. She'd survived that. She could survive this. What she feared was waking up and finding that everything she'd built was gone. Taken. Erased while she was unconscious. But she'd prepared. She'd built the bridge. She'd moved the assets that mattered. She'd documented everything. Now she just had to survive the surgery. Ruth picked her up at 5:32 in the morning. The sky was still dark, the air cold. Ellen climbed into the passenger seat with her small bag and a blanket Ruth had brought. "You ready?" Ruth asked. "As ready as I'll be." They drove in silence. The roads were empty. The city was still sleeping. St. Luke's Hospital appeared like a lit fortress, all glass and steel and glowing windows. Ruth parked in the garage. They took the elevator to the 3rd floor, where the pre-op wing smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Ellen checked in at the desk. A nurse led her back to a curtained bay with a narrow gurney, monitors for pulse. Ellen changed into a gown and lay down. The nurse started in 4-line. Attached monitors. Asked questions about allergies and medical history. "Who's your next of kin?" the nurse asked. "Ruth Delgado. My sister." The nurse made notes on a tablet. "And your medical power of attorney?" "Same. Ruth Delgado." The nurse nodded and continued typing. Daniel arrived at 6:20. He walked into the pre-op bay carrying a coffee cup and his phone. He looked at Ruth, then at Ellen. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Ellen replied. He stood in the corner, scrolling his phone, occasionally glancing up when nurses came in to check vitals or adjust equipment. The cardiologist arrived at 6:45. He explained the procedure again, opening the chest, stopping the heart, rerouting blood through a machine, placing grafts to bypass the blocked arteries. "Everything looks good," the cardiologist said. "We'll take good care of you." Ellen nodded. The anesthesiologist came in next. A woman in her 30s with a calm, steady voice. She explained what would happen, first sleepy, then deeply unconscious, then intubated for breathing. "You won't feel anything," the anesthesiologist said. "You won't remember anything." "Good," Ellen said. At 7:15, the surgical team came to wheel Ellen to the operating room. Ruth squeezed her hand. "I'll be in the waiting room," Ruth said. "I'll be there when you wake up." Ellen nodded. Daniel stepped forward. "Love you, Mom." "Love you too." The gurney moved. Ceiling tiles passed overhead in a steady rhythm. Voices murmured around her, doctors, nurses, techs preparing instruments. The operating room was cold, bright, and sterile. Someone tucked a warm blanket around Ellen's feet. The anesthesiologist appeared above her, adjusting something on an 4-pole. "Count backward from 10, she said. Ellen started counting. 10, 9, 8. Then the world disappeared. The surgery lasted 5 hours and 42 minutes. Ellen's chest was opened with a sternum sob. Her heart was stopped with a potassium solution. Blood was rerouted through a bypass machine that oxygenated it and pumped it through her body while her heart rested, still and silent. The surgeon harvested a vein from Ellen's leg and used it to create new pathways around the blocked arteries. 3 grafts. 3 new routes for blood to flow. When the grafts were in place, the heart was restarted with an electrical shock. It beat on its own steady strong. The chest was closed with wires and staples. The incision was dressed. Ellen was wheeled to recovery at 1:02 in the afternoon. She didn't know any of this. She was somewhere else, somewhere without time or awareness or thought. While Ellen was on that operating table, Daniel sat in the hospital cafeteria on the 1st floor, drinking coffee and checking his phone. Ruth was in the surgical waiting room on the 4th floor, reading a magazine she wasn't actually reading, glancing at the door every few minutes. At some point, Ruth would later say it was around 10:30. Daniel stood up, said he was going to make some calls, and left the waiting room. Ruth assumed he went to the hallway or the parking garage, somewhere quiet where he could talk without disturbing other families. But Daniel didn't go to the hallway. He went to his car. He drove out of the hospital garage and got on the Southwest Freeway. 23 minutes later, he pulled into the parking lot of the Parkway Freight Warehouse. Inside the warehouse office, Daniel unlocked the back door with his key. The alarm beeped. He entered the code and silenced it. The building was empty. It was Friday morning. Most of the drivers were out on routes. Patricia, the operations manager, wasn't scheduled to come in until 1 o'clock. Daniel walked to the back office, Ellen's old office, now his, and sat at the desk. He opened the bottom drawer and pulled out Ellen's company laptop. It was locked with a password, but Daniel had watched her type it dozens of times. He tried it. It worked. He logged into the company email account, Ellen's account. The inbox opened. He found the password reset link for the bank account and clicked it. The reset link was sent to the company email, which he now controlled. He opened it, created a new password, and logged into the bank portal. Ellen's access was still active. For now. Daniel navigated to account settings and removed Ellen Park as primary signatory. He changed her access level from full to view only, then he changed the password again to something she wouldn't guess. Next, he opened a file on the desktop labeled Contracts, Active. He copied it to a USB drive. Then he opened a word processor and drafted a document, a corporate resolution authorizing changes to account signatories and ownership structure. The document stated that Ellen Park, due to medical incapacitation, was temporarily unable to fulfill her duties as managing partner, and that Daniel Park was hereby authorized to act on her behalf for all business purposes. The document was dated March 18th, the day before surgery. It bore a signature that looked like Ellen's. Not perfect, but close enough. Daniel had practiced. He printed 2 copies. One for the bank. One for Marjorie. He placed both copies in a folder, locked the office, reset the alarm, and drove back to the hospital. He arrived at the waiting room at 11:47. Ruth looked up when he walked in. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Just had to handle a work thing." Ruth didn't say anything, but she made a mental note of the time. Ellen woke in pieces. First sound. Beeping. Rhythmic. Steady. Monitors tracking her heart, her oxygen, her blood pressure. Then sensation. Pressure on her chest. Dryness in her throat. The weight of blankets. Then awareness. Hospital room. Dim light. Clock on the wall reading 3:27. Afternoon. The surgery was over. A nurse appeared beside her. "You're awake." "Good. How do you feel?" Ellen's voice was a whisper, rough from the breathing tube. "Thirsty. I'll get you some ice chips." The nurse left. Ellen closed her eyes. Everything hurt, but in a distant, manageable way. Painkillers, probably. Something strong. Footsteps approached. Ruth's voice. "Hey." Ellen opened her eyes. Ruth stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, face tight. "You okay?" Ruth asked. Ellen nodded slightly. "The doctor said it went well. No complications. 3 grafts. He said you'll make a full recovery." "Good." Ruth pulled a chair closer and sat down. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Daniel left during the surgery." Ellen blinked slowly. "What?" "He left the hospital. For about an hour. Maybe more. Said he had to make work calls." Ellen closed her eyes. "Of course he did. I'm just telling you," Ruth said quietly. "Because I don't trust him. And you shouldn't either." Ellen didn't respond. She didn't need to. She already knew. The first day after surgery was a blur of nurses and doctors and pain medication that made time feel elastic. Ellen slept in short bursts, waking only when someone spoke to her or adjusted her for. Daniel visited once, late in the afternoon. He stood at the foot of the bed, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Tired." "Yeah. Makes sense." He glanced at his phone. "I've got everything handled at the office. Don't worry about anything." Ellen nodded. "I'll come by tomorrow," Daniel said. Then he left. Ruth stayed longer. She sat in the chair by the window, knitting something, a scarf, maybe, while Ellen drifted in and out of sleep. On the second day, Ellen's mind started to clear. The fog of anesthesia lifted enough that she could think in full sentences and could remember what had happened before the surgery. She asked for her phone. Ruth handed it over from the bedside table. Ellen unlocked it. Notifications filled the screen. Messages from friends. A few emails from vendors. Nothing from Daniel about the business, which was strange. Usually, there was always something urgent. A late delivery. A client complaint. A driver calling in sick. But now, nothing. Ellen opened the company bank app and tried to log in. Wrong password. She tried again, typing slowly, deliberately. Her fingers were swollen from fluids, but she knew she was typing correctly. Wrong password. She tried a third time. Account locked. Contact customer service to reset. Ellen stared at the screen. Her pulse quickened, but the monitors beeped steadily. She told herself she was being paranoid. She was still medicated. Her hands weren't working right. But the feeling didn't go away. She set the phone down and closed her eyes. 2 hours later, her phone buzzed. A text message from Marjorie. Saw changes to signatories on the bank account. When did we decide this? Ellen's eyes snapped open. She read the message again. Then she called Marjorie. Her voice was thin, rough from the breathing tube. Marjorie. Ellen, Marjorie sounded careful, cautious. Are you okay? What changes? There was a pause. Then Marjorie's voice dropped to a near whisper. Daniel came by my office Monday. He had corporate resolutions. He said you signed them before surgery. They remove you as primary on the bank accounts. Transfer online access to him. There's also a draft amending the partnership agreement, increasing his ownership to 75%. Ellen's chest tightened, not from the surgery. From something else. Something worse. I didn't sign anything, Ellen said. I know, Marjorie said quietly. The signature doesn't look right. And the dates don't match. These are dated March 18th. You were admitted to the hospital on the 19th. Ellen closed her eyes. Send me copies. To your personal email? Yes. Okay. Ellen, do you want me to do anything else? Not yet, Ellen said. Just send the documents. And Marjorie? Yes. Don't tell Daniel we talked. I won't. Ellen hung up and tried to open the business email account. Password incorrect. She tried twice more. Same result. Then she checked her personal email. Marjorie's message was already there, sent 3 minutes ago. 3 attachments. Ellen opened the first one. A scanned PDF of a corporate resolution. Her signature, or something close to it, appeared at the bottom. But the curves were wrong. The loops are too careful. Someone had traced it. The date, March 18, 2021. The second document was a bank authorization form, removing Ellen Park as primary signatory and naming Daniel Park as sole authorized user. The third was a partnership amendment, changing ownership from 60-40 to 25-75. Ellen read each document twice. Then she saved them to a folder on her phone labeled Evidence, Forgery. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She lay in the hospital bed, listening to the monitors beep, and thought about what came next. Daniel had made his move. He'd forged her signature. He'd locked her out of the accounts. He'd tried to steal the company while she was unconscious. But he didn't know about Parkway Bridge. He didn't know about the second bank account. He didn't know that Ellen had spent weeks moving the intellectual property, the client relationships, the systems that actually mattered. He thought he'd taken the company. What he'd actually taken was a name and a pile of debt. Ellen opened her phone and sent a text message to Richard Alvarez, her attorney. Daniel forged documents. Locked me out of accounts. Have proof. Ready to execute the separation agreement as soon as I'm discharged. Alvarez replied 2 minutes later. I'll file fraud charges Monday if you want. Also preparing a restraining order for business access. Ellen stared at the message. Fraud charges meant police. It meant investigations. It meant her grandchildren seeing their father arrested. She typed back, hold on fraud charges. Let me try separation first. But have them ready. Understood. Ellen set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. The room was too bright. The monitors beeped too loudly. Everything hurts. But her mind was clear. This wasn't over. But it will be soon. Ellen was discharged on March 26, 2021, 1 week after surgery. The cardiologist said her recovery was ahead of schedule. Her vitals were stable. The incision was healing well. Take it easy, he said. No lifting. No driving for 2 weeks. Short walks are good. Lots of rest. Ellen nodded and signed the discharge papers. Ruth drove her home. The house looked exactly as Ellen had left it. Kitchen table, worn couch, laptop on the desk, stack of mail by the door. Ruth helped her inside and set her bag on the couch. I'm staying the weekend. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Ellen didn't argue. That night, after Ruth went to bed in the guest room, Ellen sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open. She wasn't supposed to be working. The doctor had said rest, minimal stress, light activity. But Ellen had never been good at resting when there was work to do. She opened the email from Marjorie with the forged documents attached. She reviewed them carefully, zooming in on the signatures, noting the dates, comparing them to her hospital admission records. Then she opened the settlement agreement Richard Alvarez had drafted. 18 pages. Clean separation. Daniel gets the original company and its debts. Ellen keeps the systems and the clients. She made a few notes in the margins and emailed them back to Alvarez with a message, ready to execute whenever you are. Let's schedule a meeting. The next morning, Sunday, Ellen woke early. Her chest ached, but she could move. She made coffee, decaf, per doctor's orders, and sat at the kitchen table reviewing her checklist. Company formed, done. Bank account opened, done. Trademarks filed, done. Software licenses transferred, done. Client agreements, in progress. Legal separation agreement, pending signature. Evidence of fraud, documented. She opened her phone and called Laura Chin. Ellen, Laura said. How are you feeling? Better. Recovering. Good. What can I do for you? I wanted to follow up on that pilot program we discussed. The routing optimization under my personal oversight. I'm still interested. When can we start? Give me 2 weeks. I'll have the paperwork ready by then. Sounds good. Ellen, I need to tell you something. What? Daniel called me last week. He said he's taking over our account. Said you're stepping back due to health reasons. Ellen's grip tightened on the phone. What did you tell him? I told him I need to hear that from you directly. He said he'd have you call me. I'm calling you now. I'm not stepping back. And Daniel won't be handling your account. Good, Laura said. Because honestly, I don't want to work with him. No offense. None taken. I'll send you a new service agreement under Parkway Bridge Logistics. Same routes, same drivers, same service. Just a different company structure. Perfect. Ellen hung up and called the 2 other clients she'd spoken to before surgery. Both confirmed they'd received similar calls from Daniel. Both confirmed they wanted to stay with Ellen. By the end of the weekend, Ellen had secured commitments from 3 major clients representing over 60% of Parkway Freight's annual revenue. Daniel didn't know yet, but he would soon. On Monday, March 29th, Ellen met with Richard Alvarez in his office. Ruth drove her there and waited in the reception area. Alvarez had the settlement agreement ready. He walked Ellen through it page by page. This formalizes the separation, he said. You're giving him the original company in exchange for acknowledging that certain assets, intellectual property, client relationships, trademarks, belong to you personally. He assumes all liabilities. You assume none. And if he doesn't sign, then we file fraud charges based on the forged documents. We also filed for an emergency injunction freezing all company accounts pending investigation. How long would that take? The injunction? 24 hours. The criminal case? Months. Ellen thought about her grandchildren. About family holidays. About the weight of having her son arrested. Let me try to get him to sign first, she said. Okay. When do you want to do this? This week. Before he realizes what's happening. Alvarez nodded. I'll set it up. Do you want me there? Yes. Okay. I'll call him and schedule a meeting. I'll say it's about formalizing post-surgery business structures. Routine stuff. He won't know what's coming until he walks in the room. Ellen left the office and went home. That afternoon, she activated Parkway Bridge Logistics. She updated the website, transferred the domain registration to her name, and uploaded service descriptions identical to what Parkway Freight offered. She contacted the drivers she trusted, the ones who'd been with her for years, and asked if they'd be interested in moving to a new company under her direct management. 5 of them said yes immediately. She called vendors and notified them that future work would be billed under Parkway Bridge Logistics, LLC. She transferred the route optimization software license to her personal name. She moved the training manuals, process documents, and client profiles to her personal cloud storage. By the end of the week, Parkway Bridge was operational. It had infrastructure. It had clients. It had drivers. It had everything except a physical warehouse, and Ellen had already found a smaller space for at least 3 miles from the old location. Now she just needed Daniel to sign the papers that made it official. The meeting was scheduled for Friday, April 9, 2021, at 10 in the morning. Location: the conference room at Richard Alvarez's law office. Ellen arrived 15 minutes early. She wore a loose blouse over her healing incision and comfortable shoes. She carried the worn manila folder labeled Bridge, Legal, tucked under her arm. Alvarez was already there, sitting at a conference table with his legal pad open and 3 neat stacks of documents laid out. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Ready." "Good. Remember, stay calm. Don't get emotional. This is a business transaction." Ellen nodded. At 10:03, the receptionist opened the door. "Daniel Park is here. Send him in." Daniel walked in wearing slacks, a button-down shirt, and the new smartwatch Ellen had noticed during her hospital stay. He looked confident, almost cheerful. "Hey, Mom," he said, smiling. "You're looking good." "Thank you." Daniel glanced at Alvarez. "And you are?" "Richard Alvarez, Ellen's attorney." The smile faltered slightly. "Attorney? Why do we need an attorney for a business meeting?" "Because we're formalizing some changes," Alvarez said calmly. "Please have a seat." Daniel sat down slowly, his eyes moving between Ellen and Alvarez. "What kind of changes?" Alvarez slid a folder across the table. "This is a separation agreement. It formalizes the division of business interests between you and your mother." Daniel opened the folder. His expression shifted: confusion, then irritation, then something harder. "What is this?" he asked. "A clean separation," Ellen said. "You take full ownership of Parkway Freight. I take the systems and client relationships I built." We both walked away. "Walk away?" "I'm not walking away from anything. I run this company." "Actually," Alvarez said, "you don't. The partnership agreement requires joint signatures for major decisions. Your mother still owns 60%. You own 40-inch. That's about to change." "No," Alvarez said quietly. "It's not. Because the documents you filed, the corporate resolutions, the bank authorizations, were forged." Daniel's face flushed. "I didn't forget anything." Alvarez pulled out a second folder. "These are the documents you presented to Marjorie Lewis and the bank. They're dated March 18th. Ellen was admitted to the hospital on March 19th. The signatures don't match her verified signature on file. The notary stamps are absent. And we have a recording of you asking Marjorie to replicate Ellen's signature." Daniel stared at the documents. Then he looked at Ellen. "You recorded me." "Marjorie did," Ellen said. "Texas is a one-party consent state. This is insane." "This is fraud," Alvarez said. And Ellen has 3 options. Option 1. She presses criminal charges. You're arrested, investigated, probably charged with forgery and fraud. Option 2. She files a civil suit for damages and theft. Long, expensive, public. Option 3. You sign this agreement, take ownership of the original company, and everyone moves on. Daniel flipped through the pages of the settlement agreement. "You're starting a competing company. That's a conflict of interest." "There's no non-compete clause in your partnership agreement," Alvarez said. "We checked." "This is unbelievable." "This is fair," Ellen said. "You tried to take my company while I was unconscious. I'm giving you a way out that doesn't involve the police." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What if I don't sign?" "Then we file charges Monday morning," Alvarez said. "Fraud. Forgery. Unauthorized access to financial accounts. The company freezes. The bank freezes. Everything stops while it's investigated. And Daniel, you really don't want that. Daniel stared at the paper. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Ellen watched him. She could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Pride versus risk. Control versus exposure. Finally, he picked up the pen. "This is insane," he muttered. "This is necessary," Ellen replied. He signed. 3 copies. One for Ellen. One for him. One for Alvarez. He initiated every page, signed every signature line, dated everything April 9th, 2021. When he finished, he stood up, grabbed his copy, and walked toward the door. He stopped and turned back. "You know what this looks like, right?" he said. "It looks like you don't trust your own son." Ellen met his eyes. "I don't." Daniel stared at her for a long moment. Then he left. The door closed behind him. Alvarez collected the signed documents and placed them carefully in his briefcase. That went better than expected. Ellen didn't respond. She stared at the table where Daniel had signed his name, 3 times per page, initials in the margins, and felt nothing. No victory. No relief. Just the quiet, factual knowledge that she had taken back what was hers. "What happens now?" Alvarez asked. "Now," Ellen said, "I run my company." Spring turned into summer. The heat settled over Houston like a weight, thick, oppressive, unrelenting. Ellen worked from a smaller office attached to a modest warehouse she leased under Parkway Bridge Logistics, LLC. The building was in an industrial park off the East Freeway, newer and cleaner than the old location, with better lighting and a parking lot that didn't flood when it rained. She hired 2 drivers in May. Carlos and Dennis. The longtime drivers Daniel had reassigned without her approval called her the day after the separation agreement was filed. "We heard you're operating independently now," Carlos said. "Are you hiring?" "I am. We want to apply." "Both of you?" "Yes, ma'am." Ellen hired them both. Then she hired 4 more drivers over the next 2 months. By July, Parkway Bridge had 8 trucks on the road, running routes 6 days a week. Laura Chen signed a full-service contract with Parkway Bridge in late April, moving all of Southwest Manufacturing's freight under Ellen's direct oversight. The contract was worth $370,000 annually. The other 2 clients Ellen had contacted before surgery, the retail distribution company and the industrial supply distributor, both signed contracts in May. Combined, they represented another $200,000 in annual revenue. By June, Parkway Bridge had 6 active clients, a fleet of 8 trucks, and a revenue projection that matched what Parkway Freight had earned in its 4th year of operation. Ellen didn't advertise. She didn't badmouth Daniel. When vendors asked what happened, she said simply, "We're operating under a new structure now. This is the company I personally oversee." People heard what they needed to hear. Meanwhile, Parkway Freight, the original company, now fully owned by Daniel, started to unravel. Without Ellen's personal guarantee, the bank refused to extend the line of credit. The existing credit line was capped at its current level, $75,000, and couldn't be increased without additional collateral. Vendors who had been flexible with payments began demanding net 15 instead of net 30. Some required payment up front. A late tax filing in April triggered penalties from the IRS. Then an audit notice arrived in May. Drivers started calling Ellen, asking if she had openings. "What's going on over there?" Dennis asked one afternoon. "I don't know," Ellen said. "But if you know anyone looking for work, have them call me." By August, the Parkway Freight truck yard sat half empty. Routes were dropped. Clients didn't renew contracts. Ellen heard about it through Marjorie, who still did the books for the original company Daniel had kept her on, probably because he didn't know how to do the accounting himself. "He's struggling," Marjorie said carefully during a phone call in late August. "Cash flow is tight. He's behind on vendor payments. The IRS is asking questions." "That's not my problem anymore," Ellen said. "I know. I'm just telling you." Ellen thanked her and hung up. In September, Daniel called. It was a Thursday afternoon. Ellen was at her office, reviewing manifests. Her phone buzzed. Daniel's name on the screen. She let it ring twice before answering. Hello. Mom, Daniel's voice sounded strained. I need to talk to you about something. What? The accountant's saying we're behind on taxes. Like, way behind. She's making it sound worse than it is. Then you should talk to the accountant. I did. She says it's serious. That we might owe penalties. Okay. I was wondering if you could. No, Ellen said. You didn't let me finish. I don't need to. The company is yours now. Your name is on the documents. I have no authority and no liability. There was a long silence. Then Daniel said, This is my life, Mom. It was mine too, Ellen said. For 23 years. I made a mistake. You forged my signature. Another silence. Then Daniel hung up. Ellen set the phone down and went back to her manifest. She didn't feel satisfied. She didn't feel vindicated. She just felt tired. By October, word around the logistics community was that Parkway Freight was selling off assets. Ellen heard it from a driver who'd applied for a job at Parkway Bridge. Saw 3 of their trucks being hauled out last week, the driver said. Looked like a liquidation. Ellen nodded, but didn't comment. In December, Marjorie called again. He sold it, Marjorie said. I heard. He sold it to Rio Grande Logistics. They bought the trucks, the lease, and the name. The sale price was $72,000. After paying off debts, he walked away with almost nothing. Ellen closed her eyes. Okay. Are you okay? Marjorie asked. I'm fine. Ellen, I need to tell you something. What? I saw the final accounting. The company had $230,000 in outstanding debts when he sold it. Vendor bills, tax penalties, loan payments. He couldn't keep up. Ellen didn't respond. You saved yourself, Marjorie said quietly. If you'd stayed, you'd have been liable for all of it. I know. After Marjorie hung up, Ellen sat at her desk for a long time, staring out the window at the parking lot. A truck pulled in one of hers, returning from a delivery. She'd saved herself. But she'd lost her son in the process. Not lost, exactly. He was still alive, still part of the family in the loosest sense. But they didn't talk anymore. Not really. Not about anything that mattered. At family gatherings, birthdays, holidays, the occasional soccer game for the grandkids, they were polite. Distant. They talked about the weather, about the children's schools, about Ruth's new apartment. They did not talk about the business. They did not talk about what happened. Daniel told people he'd moved on to other opportunities. Ellen let him keep that story. It didn't cost her anything. 2 years later, in the spring of 2023, Ellen Park sat at her kitchen table reconciling the books for Parkway Bridge Logistics, LLC. The business was stable. Revenue was steady at just over $1 million annually. The fleet had grown to 18 trucks. The clients paid on time. The drivers stayed. Ellen was 59 years old. The scar on her chest had faded to a thin, pale line barely visible beneath her shirts. She could walk 5 miles without getting winded. She could lift boxes when needed, though she usually didn't. She could work a full day and often did. The kitchen table was the same one she'd sat at 25 years earlier when she'd filed the original paperwork for Parkway Freight Solutions. Same chairs. Same window looking out at the same quiet street. Same lamp throwing shadows across the wall in the evenings. But everything else was different. Ellen had updated her estate planning in the fall of 2021, 6 months after the separation. The business was now held in an irrevocable trust, managed by a professional trustee from a firm that specialized in family business succession. The trust had clear instructions. When Ellen died or became incapacitated, Parkway Bridge would continue operating under professional management until her grandchildren turned 30, at which point they could decide whether to take over operations or sell. No family sentiment. No assumptions of competence. No single person holds too much power. Ruth was named as medical and financial power of attorney. Not Daniel. The paperwork was filed with the hospital, with Ellen's bank, with her attorney. Ellen saw Daniel at family events, birthdays, Christmas, occasional Sunday dinners at Ruth's apartment. They were civil. They hugged hello and goodbye. They asked about each other's lives in vague, general terms. Daniel was working in sales again. Some kind of software company Ellen had never heard of. He seemed fine. The divorce from his second wife, that had happened in 2022, had been quick and quiet. The grandchildren were growing up. 7 and 9 years old now. They played soccer and took piano lessons and asked Ellen questions about trucks whenever she visited. "Do you own a lot of trucks, Grandma?" 18. "That's a lot." "It is. Can I drive one someday?" "When you're old enough." Ellen didn't tell them about Parkway Freight. She didn't tell them about the forgery or the hospital or the separation agreement. They didn't need to know. Maybe they'd figure it out later when they were older. Maybe they'd ask questions. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe it would just be history, a thing that happened before they were old enough to understand. On a quiet Tuesday evening in May, Ellen sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open and a cup of tea cooling beside her. The sun was setting. The neighborhood was quiet. The traffic on the distant freeway was a low, steady hum. She reviewed the day's invoices. 8 deliveries. All on time. All confirmed. All paid. She opened her bank account, the Parkway Bridge account, and checked the balance. Healthy. No red flags. No surprises. She opened her personal email and saw a message from one of her drivers. "Ellen, just wanted to say thank you for hiring me last year. Best job I've had in logistics. You run a solid operation." Ellen smiled slightly and typed back, "Thank you. I appreciate the good work." She closed the laptop and sat in the quiet kitchen, listening. The refrigerator hummed. The air vents creaked. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and then went silent. Ellen thought about the surgery. About waking up in that hospital room and discovering she'd been locked out of her own accounts. About the forged signatures and the settlement meeting and the day Daniel signed away his claim to everything she'd built. She didn't feel angry anymore. Anger had faded into something else, something quieter, more like clarity. She had saved herself. She had built the bridge before the fire reached her. She had prepared for betrayal without hoping for it, and when it came, she had been ready. That was the lesson. Not revenge. Not justice. Just readiness. Ellen stood, rinsed her teacup, and turned off the lights in the kitchen. She walked to the front door, checked the lock, and set the alarm. On the table by the door, a single silver key sat on a small dish. The only key to the Parkway Bridge office. Ellen's key. No one else had a copy. She picked it up, felt its weight, and set it back down. That key, that small piece of metal, represented something bigger than access to a building. It represented autonomy. Control. The ability to lock a door and know that no one could open it without permission. Ellen walked down the hall to her bedroom. The house was small, quiet, and familiar. It was the same house she'd lived in for 18 years. The same house where she'd cried after her husband died. The same house where she'd raised her son. The same house where she'd sat at the kitchen table and built a business from nothing. She'd lost that business once. And then she'd built it again. Not from nothing this time. From knowledge. From relationships. From systems she'd designed and refined over decades. The second time was easier. Because she knew what mattered. And she knew what didn't. Names didn't matter. Buildings didn't matter. Signs on doors didn't matter. What mattered was who people trusted. Who they called when something went wrong. Who they wanted in charge when the stakes were high. Ellen had learned that lesson the hard way. But she'd learned it. And now, at 59, with a faded scar on her chest and a company that bore her name in everything but title, she lived quietly. Calmly. Without fear of losing what she'd built, because she knew how to build it again if she had to. She lay down in bed, pulled the blanket up, and closed her eyes. Outside, the city hummed. Trucks moved along the freeways, carrying shipments from one place to another. Some of those trucks were hers. Some of those routes had been designed by her years ago, when she was younger and less certain. Now she is older. And certain. Certain that trust is earned, not given. Certain that power is built, not claimed. Certain that the strongest structures are the ones no one can see from the outside, the relationships, the systems, the knowledge that lives in one person's mind and nowhere else. Ellen fell asleep to the sound of her own breathing, the steady rhythm of a heart that had been stopped and restarted, that had survived surgery and betrayal and the long, slow work of rebuilding. When morning came, she would wake early. She would make coffee. She would sit at the kitchen table and review the day's manifests. The trucks would leave at dawn. The routes would run smoothly. The clients would be satisfied. And Ellen would sit in her small office in the industrial park off the East Freeway, answering her phone when it rang, solving problems as they appeared, running a business she had built twice. That was peace. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Just the quiet knowledge that she had taken back what was hers, and no one could take it again. The scar on her chest was a reminder. Not of betrayal. Of survival. And every morning, when Ellen unlocked her office and turned on the lights and looked out at the parking lot where her trucks waited, she remembered that moment in the hospital, the locked accounts, the forged signatures, the realization that her son had tried to steal her life's work. And she remembered that she'd seen it coming. Not because she was paranoid. Because she was paying attention. That was the difference between being stolen from and being prepared. Ellen had learned that difference over decades. Through bad partners and late payments and clients who disappeared without warning. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't angry. She was just clear. Clear on what belonged to her. Clear on what she'd earned. Clear on what she would protect. And if that meant her son no longer had access to her business, her accounts, or her trust, well, that was the cost of his choices. Ellen had made her choices too. She had chosen to prepare. To build the bridge. To save herself. And now, 2 years later, sitting at her kitchen table in the quiet evening light, she lived with those choices peacefully. The phone stayed face down on the table. The laptop stayed closed. The single silver key sat on the dish by the door. And outside, in the distance, a semi's engine hummed along the freeway. One of her trucks. One of her routes. That sound, low, steady, reliable, was the sound of work continuing. Of systems functioning. Of a business that existed because Ellen Park had built it, protected it, and refused to let it be taken. That was enough. That was everything. Every story here will stir your soul. Welcome to Spice and Sugar, your daily escape into real emotions, bold lives, and unforgettable lessons. Here, it's all about love, loss, laughter, and the quiet strength that carries us through. I share stories that make you feel, that remind you you're not alone, that every bitter moment can lead to something sweet. If you want to laugh, cry, and see life through stories that heal and inspire, subscribe and stay a while.